And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam, second live show of the day. We're going to be talking about a lot of different units on different defenses, and also continuing this morning's show. Awkward way of saying it. I'm not used to going live 2 times in a day. But before we begin, I have some favors to ask of you. Like the show, subscribe to it, hit the notification bell. Bless me. My goodness. Sorry about that. Make sure to not be sick. My entire family is sick, so I hope that they can heal up and be better. Stay safe out there. I know a lot of players in different fall camps have been injured. Jam Miller at Alabama, running back. Quentin Joyner at Texas Tech, running back. Andrew Babalola at Michigan, left tackle, offensive tackle. There's been a lot of injuries going around. My family's been sick, so make sure to stay safe. And also hit that notification bell. That way you can get notified when we go live. And go Big Red to all of you Nebraska fans in this chat right now. Yeah, we're going to be going live talking about a ton of different units. I first and foremost want to discuss Texas's wide receivers, which that's what we were going to talk about early this morning before I decided to call it quits. So now that we're here to talk about the Texas wide receivers, why not? Let's start off with that, and then we'll get into more of these defensive units and also talk about Nebraska here a bit. I see there's a lot of Nebraska people in our live show, and I'm here to tell you that we are going to have 2 topics, 2 segments on Nebraska. So stay tuned for those. Those are coming later in the show. I firstly want to talk about Texas's wide receivers. Texas has too much talent in this wide receiver room for me to sell stock in this group. I know they had to bring in a transfer wide receiver in Emmett Mosley V, but I am certain that the only reason they brought him in is because he could do things for them. He could be productive. It sounds like he's a fit there. And you have Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore Jr. returning. I do have some concerns about their depth. They have a lot of young players in that room, but for example, I love Jamie French and then Khalil Lockett as well. Those are 2 of their freshmen who I have no doubts will be involved in the wide receiver room. I don't think either of them will be redshirted at the end of the year because I think they'll need them, especially as the season goes on. And Texas is going to be, once again, I think, playing in 15, 16 games this year. 14, 15, 16 games, kind of in that range. I'm pretty high on this team, as most are. Their starters should be top end in the SEC. This is certainly a wide receiver room that can contend for the top 10, which is what I nearly said there. And they will be top end, top notch nationally as well. I love what this group has. And when you look at the production they return, is it a whole lot? No, because wide receiver 1 Matthew Golden is off to the NFL. But looking at Wingo, he had over 600 snaps last year, 472 yards, 2 touchdowns, was, I would say, a freak by freshman standards. Was he Jeremiah Smith? No. Was he Ryan Williams? No. But he was good. And with a 64.6 PFF grade as a true freshman, 5-star coming out of high school, I would expect him to take that next step this season, become wide receiver 1 for Texas. Emmett Mosley V, starting wide receiver Z, 68.2 PFF grade with 501 snaps. He had 525 yards and 6 touchdowns at Stanford. Stanford, of all places, has not been known for offensive success. It's not been known for winning football, period. So I imagine that his numbers and his productivity will take a huge step forward at Texas especially. You got to watch out for some of these transfers that come in from smaller schools and you think, they don't know how to play Big Ten or SEC football. How dare people predict them to do well when they're going to step up and have to face tougher competition? That's a fair point. It is. It's a fair point a lot of people make about John Mateer, for example. However, And you can apply this to John Mateer, you can apply it to other players as well. The positive end of that is that they are often joining more talented supporting casts too. So Emmett Mosley V is going to be playing with a better quarterback in Arch Manning than I believe Ashton Daniels, who was Stanford's starting quarterback last season. He is going to have a better offensive line, better tight ends, overall just a better roster that should give him better opportunities at Texas than what he had with Stanford. And Texas's schedule this year is not an Oklahoma or Florida caliber schedule. So I imagine that his addition is going to have more positives and more likely pan out than not. Jamie French Jr. and Kalik Lockett are true freshmen. French had a 96 overall rating in the 2025 class. 4-star, high-level 4-star. Kalik Lockett was a 98 overall rated player, 5-star out of high school. They are, at least according to ourlads.com on the Texas depth chart, they are listed as depth pieces at the wide receiver Z position. I think that they are going to have significant playing time this year. Significant playing time. Because again, this room is, to my knowledge at least, not one of the deepest rooms in the country, and you're not only going to be rolling 3 wide receivers out there all the time. So I imagine they will get plenty of reps. I don't think either will be redshirted. More importantly, I think they will be good players and immediately be some of the SEC's better players, especially relative to other second-string wide receivers. So that is a huge benefit, especially since Texas is going to have them for several more seasons. And we have wide receiver H. DeAndre Moore Jr., 65 PFF grade, 7 touchdowns with 456 receiving yards. This is a group that is going to help Arch Manning step up in the pocket to be able to take deep shots, which he loves to take, and be one of the better quarterbacks in America. What I like about this receiver group is looking at all of the secondaries and defenses they will play. There are really only 2 that jump out to me. Ohio State in week 1 and Georgia in week 12 that I think could limit them. And I don't think shut them down. I think Ohio State has enough questions at corner. Georgia has enough questions with depth to where when they play them, Ohio State in week 1, Georgia in week 12, I don't think this receiver group is going to be shut down by anyone they play. No one. Now, to be fair, I don't know if anyone has a lockdown secondary in college football this year. I don't know if anyone does. But Georgia could. Ohio State could. Maybe Oklahoma, but that's a strong maybe. And then while Florida and A&M, I think will have good secondaries, I would not count on them having secondaries that can totally limit the talent that Texas has at wide receiver. This Texas defense is going to be legendary. The offense has some questions, but an area that I don't think is a massive question mark is wide receiver because of the 2 starters there that they return, the talent they have, the incoming transfer in Mosley V, and that combined with the pedigree that Texas's offense has on the offensive line and what they have in Arch Manning leads me to believe this receiver group is going to be incredibly productive. Wouldn't be shocked if this offense shows moments of more explosiveness and more explosivity overall than they did last season. I wouldn't be shocked by that at all, especially with Arch Manning loving the deep ball, and the fact that while Matthew Golden is off to the NFL and he will be very productive, so that is a big loss there, they have Wingo, they have DeAndre Moore Jr., and they have some younger guys who are high-ceiling, athletic, future NFL wide receivers if developed properly in their own right, and that's going to help the Longhorns have a successful 2025 campaign. Moving on now to bigger and better things, Georgia's wide receivers. And when I say bigger and better things, it's not a shot at Texas. It's the fact that Georgia's wide receiver group has taken a massive step forward. Massive. In fact, I will say it probably is deeper than the Texas wide receiver group that we just talked about. Can Georgia catch the ball this year? That's a question I bet a lot of people are asking. I would venture that more casual fans are asking that question, and that the more insightful, studied, studious fans are asking, how deep do they go? Who's the true wide receiver 1? Can they get Noah Thomas and or Zachariah Branch to really break out, to transform this unit from just a good one that took big steps forward from last year to an awesome one that can maybe carry the passing game a little bit. Because this Georgia wide receiver room has that potential. And you may think I'm insane, but let me bring up the numbers for you, because the proof is in the pudding here as to what this Georgia wide receiver room is. The proof's in the pudding. So Noah Thomas, starting wide receiver X, 574 receiving yards last year and 8 receiving touchdowns. He had 664 snaps, a 70 PFF grade, played at Texas A&M, and Texas A&M had some struggles at quarterback last year in the passing game department. It's not saying Gunnar Stockton's going to be the best thing in the world. It's not what I'm saying. However, he is a reliable wide receiver, makes good contested catches, is older, has a veteran presence about him, and is going to be joining an offense that theoretically should be more talented and should be better, and also better coordinated than the offense last year. I'm not again saying that Mike Bobo is better than Colin Klein when I make that statement. What I'm saying is Colin Klein last year was in year 1 with a new roster. Bobo was at Georgia for year 2 and had been an analyst on Georgia's staff for more than 2 years, when he was only the offensive coordinator at the time for 2 years. So I think that Georgia right now, with what they have returning at wide receiver, so they bring back Colby Young, Dylan Bell, London Humphreys, with what they return at tight end, the offensive line, running back, and Stockton at least started a game last year and played some in the SEC championship game. They will definitely, I think, be more confident in who they are, probably than A&M was last year. So that should help Noah Thomas. For Colby Young, what should help him is all of his legal issues are solved. So he's going to be with the team full-time, barring anything else happening, and I hope nothing else negative happens. 137 snaps last year. He had a 70.2 PFF grade, 2 receiving touchdowns on 149 receiving yards. Dylan Bell had 466 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. So right now, we are up to 14 receiving touchdowns. 14 with 3 players that we're talking about. And we still have 2 more left to go. Humphreys last year had 244 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And Zachariah Branch had 503 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, with PFF grades in the 60s. This is a deep unit. Georgia, I think, this year could legitimately go 5 wide, and every receiver they have is a threat. It's not Ohio State. It's probably not Auburn. Certainly not Clemson. Not Alabama either. But those are some of the best receiver rooms in the country. And with Georgia's style of ball, what we think they have on defense, what the offensive line based on recruiting and NFL development profiling says, and the fact that their running back room should be deeper and they return everyone at tight end, they should not need an elite wide receiver room to have an extremely productive offense. Did Todd Monken in any of his years at Georgia have an elite wide receiver room? An elite one. One of the best in the country. I wouldn't say so. No. Maybe if Pickens was healthy for the entirety of 2021 and on top of, A.D. Mitchell and Ladd McConkey, but that wasn't reality. He was banged up for much of the season. This is a impressive unit here that we're talking about. And it's important that this unit stays healthy, that players stay out of trouble, and I wish I didn't have to bring that up more than once, but it is a recurring theme, so it's a factor. And it's also important that the players who come back in Humphreys, Bell, and Young, that they are developed and that they play well and that the staff knows how to utilize them, because there's a lot of unknowns for this Georgia offense right now. There's a lot of them. Will they be able to run the ball for more than 4 yards per carry every other game? And the other games outside of half of those games per year, they run it for fewer than 4 yards per carry. Will they be able to catch the football outside of the 2 transfers? I mean, those are serious questions, and those are legitimate questions too. This is not hyperbole. These are legitimate questions that Georgia had to face last season. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen with this wide receiver group. I'm pretty optimistic about it. I'm pretty high on this unit, and I think that with how the schedule aligns with Georgia, that they will have plenty of opportunities to show that they are upgraded. They will have plenty of opportunities to ease Gunnar Stockton into his starting role. So Marshall and Austin Peay obviously are not going to be tests for this wide receiver room. Tennessee could, but Tennessee loses a lot on defense, and Georgia upgrades a ton at wide receiver. And I think that Tennessee's defensive backs, as much as I love some of them, especially corner if healthy there, they did get exposed a bit by Ohio State last year. I think Tennessee's elite defense in part was a product of their schedule and not necessarily the fact they locked down the great offenses they played. Georgia put 31 points on them. Ohio State casually put up, I think, 42 points on Tennessee. So will that be a test for them? We'll have to see. Alabama, in theory, should have a great secondary, but will it be one of the nation's best? We'll have to see, much like whether or not Georgia's wide receiver group is great. I think that is the game to circle when it comes to making a full-on judgment with this unit. And then for the rest of the year, I don't think that Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida, Georgia Tech have the secondaries to slow down this wide receiver group for most of the game. The biggest question and the biggest challenge for this team outside of Alabama and Tennessee in relationship to the wide receiver group is probably going to be Texas, who I would venture along with Alabama will be the biggest test for this roster and Kirby Smart in the regular season, as Texas should have a top 2, top 3 defense, and many have tabbed them as the number 1 defense in all of college football. I'm excited to watch Georgia's offense because of the changes at all positions. The turnover on the offensive line, them adding Josh McCray from the portal, changing and transitioning from Carson Beck to Gunnar Stockton, upgrading the wide receiver room. They do bring back all the tight ends, but the tight ends were inconsistent last year. What will this offense yield in 2025? Well, we have less than 2 weeks to get our first glimpse at that. I know it's against Marshall, but that'll at least provide us with something. I predict that Georgia will have a better passing game than last year. Maybe that's bold with the questions Stockton has, but Beck seemed a little disengaged and was certainly off, and Georgia's receivers and tight ends will be dramatically better, according to projections and what they return, than what they were in 2024. Now we can talk about Georgia's defense as well. That's something else that I wanted to talk about on the show tonight. Let's read any chats before we get to this. By the way, I know that some of you probably see the goal up there, the little target on the top chat. If we get over $50 in super chats, I will go live for Iowa State, Kansas State. Probably won't do a play-by-play, but I will announce some plays. I'll talk to you guys about the game, all while taking notes and probably working on other projects relating to the channel, and we'll have a pretty fun time. If we get $50 or more in super chats, I will go live and have a live watch party with you all for the kickoff game of the college football season for 2025, that being Farmageddon. The prediction for that game is coming tomorrow on tomorrow's show at 6 p.m. Eastern time, so pay attention to that. Now, let's look at Georgia's defense and ask the question, does Georgia's defense have a ceiling in 2025? And the reason I ask this question is that Georgia, ever since that awesome 2021 defense, has been declining year over year over year in defensive metrics and in consistent performance. They have become more inconsistent, less disciplined. I'd argue the unit has become thinner over time, and I just wonder if that trend could continue this year. I would guess, from an educated standpoint, probably not, but the unit's also young, and the unit does have some concerns. So I do want to talk about those and also twist some positive things in there. This Georgia defense could very well be a mixed bag entering 2025. Georgia and Kirby Smart miss the 2021 defense. They miss that unit. Georgia held opponents to 10.2 points per game. 10.2 points per game in 2021. And that defense was historically dominant. The 14-1 Bulldogs just blew people out left and right, an uber efficient offense and a defense that was absolutely legendary. Ever since that unit, Georgia's been on the decline a little bit defensively. So I ask the question, does Georgia's defense in 2025 have a cap? Do they have a ceiling that limits how elite they can be? It's a question that I don't think Georgia and Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann would be used to conceptually, because obviously no one in the media is probably asking them that question. But I would venture that when you look at the talent inside of your locker room, when you look at your depth chart, when you observe practice and watch film, that coaches think about things like this. Does my defense, offense, do my players have any limitations, and how can I help them? That's what the great and elite coaches do. They help their players and adjust their scheme to their players. I love this Georgia defense and so many players on it. But as we'll get to in this segment, Georgia, ever since that elite 2021 unit, has regressed on defense. And they once again lose a lot of talent. Mykel Williams, for example, Malachi Starks, and others, Nazir Stackhouse, Chaz Chambliss. They lose a lot of talent to the NFL, and there's definitely other players they lost as well, and you have the transfer portal. So does this defense have a ceiling that would prevent it from being the best defense or one of the best defenses in college football? Well, let's take a look at that. Let's look at Georgia's defenses, and specifically their depth chart. I want to first talk about the defensive line, and then I want to discuss linebacker, DB, and look at the historical statistics of Kirby Smart's defenses in the 2020s. So the defensive line, you have Joseph Jonah Ajonye, who was very limited last year in terms that he only played 49 snaps. Jordan Hall, projected starting nose tackle, only played around 50 snaps. Christian Miller is the big name returning, with 385 snaps last season, 1.5 sacks, and an 82.2 PFF grade. I have him projected as one of the best defensive tackles in America. One of them. He's up there. He's up there with Zane Durant. He's up there with Peter Woods. These big-name All-American defensive tackles. Christian Miller could be the best defensive tackle in America this season. Gabe Harris Jr. comes back with 175 snaps and 2 sacks at edge. 2 sacks, not snacks, although to these defensive ends, I imagine sacks feel just as good as having a great snack. And Elo Madozi is the incoming Army transfer at edge with 6.5 sacks, 527 snaps, and a 74.3 PFF grade. The loss of Mykel Williams hurts. I don't know if they have a player at his level projected to start on the defensive line, specifically at defensive end or at that jack edge position where Georgia, they run technically a 3-4 defense, but they have different formations. They have the depth to run whatever they want, and they have adjusted their personnel to fit with a lot of the modern nickel defenses, the common 4-2-5, for example, which has replaced the 4-3 as really the defense of college football, as defenses have adapted to the spread. The defensive line, I think, is deeper than some expect, than some believe, because even though they are young, they have recruited at an exceptionally high level on the defensive line, and they've developed well on the defensive line, sending NFL draft pick after NFL draft pick after NFL draft pick off to have success. I like Xavier McLeod at defensive tackle, and you got to also pay attention to Nasir Johnson and Elijah Griffin, too. Elijah Griffin is a 5-star true freshman. Many know Justice Terry, who got poached from the state of Georgia to play at Texas. He wanted to go to Georgia, but Texas offered a bigger NIL package. Georgia already got Elijah Griffin, who was viewed as a better defensive tackle than Justice Terry. So that is a name to pay attention to on the defensive line. Several names, too. I love what they have there. And then at linebacker, This is an extremely impressive room. And here I also added in Elijah Griffin because I didn't have space for him on the other slide. But number 1 overall defensive tackle in the 2025 class with a 100 overall rating. Wonderful player. I expect him to see the field this year and be involved in that rotation. You got C.J. Allen and Justin Williams at MAC linebacker and Raylan Wilson and Chris Cole at money linebacker. C.J. Allen returns with 641 snaps and 3 tackles for loss. Raylan Wilson had 420 snaps and 7 tackles for loss, and Chris Cole had 107 snaps and 2 tackles for loss. All of their PFF grades were around 70. Lower 70s, Raylan Wilson was at a 69.9, just below a 70. But you also have to remember that PFF grades are just grades across the board. They don't do the best job of adjusting for competition. That is one of their weaknesses. So I would imagine these PFF grades severely underrate these Georgia linebackers who played, I would say, the toughest schedule in college football last year. And they had to face several offenses with potent players, with future NFL players. Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen are one of those linebacker duos that, along with Anthony Hill Jr. and Trey Moore, with Tony Rojas and Amari Campbell, with Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, could be the best and most athletic in all of college football. Georgia has that. And the fact that they have Justin Williams and Chris Cole behind Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen means they have playable depth. And again, going back to Georgia's defense, they can come out in a variety of different looks, a variety of different formations. They can do a whole lot. And there's a lot of potential, a lot of talent in this room. And I trust Georgia's staff. I will never not trust them when it comes to developing the talent they have on board. Secondary, I think, is the weakest position on this team. I think defensive line and linebacker, the front of Georgia is stronger than the pure backfield of Georgia. Take, for example, Daniel Harris. 3 passes defended with 518 snaps, and he had a PFF grade in the high 50s. Ja'Cory Thomas had 114 snaps and 2 passes defended, back up to Malachi Starks last year. He had a PFF grade in the 50s. KJ Bolden was an absolute superstar as a true freshman. A pick, a pass defended, 552 snaps, and an 82 PFF grade. He's going to be an All-American this year. Dalen Everett with a 73.4 PFF grade, 3 picks and 3 passes defended will be pretty good. And I think nickel Jonel Aguero with 328 snaps and a PFF grade in the 60s should take steps forward. This secondary last season was uninspiring. As you saw against Alabama, as you saw against Georgia Tech, as you saw against Texas the second time, and the first time, I would say the reason Texas didn't pass in the secondary, the secondary was good, yes, but a lot of that also had to do with what Georgia schematically was doing on defense and their defensive line stepping up against the Texas offensive line and bullying them against an injured Quinn Ewers and an experienced Arch Manning. And I think that this unit needs to take steps forward for this to be the number 1 defense in college football, because they do lose a lot in the defensive line. They have a ton of good players at linebacker. They're very deep there. However, having a elite secondary, I think, would unlock so much for this defensive front. So much. Because they have size, athleticism, speed, strength. They have it all defensively, especially on the lines of scrimmage and at your quarterback of the defense, linebacker. The question for Georgia defensively, I think, mostly centers around the secondary. And I think that also ties in with Georgia's past defenses under Kirby Smart. So the 2020 defense, it was COVID. During that time, defenses across the board were down because you couldn't have contact in practice. They were 17th in points per game allowed with 20, and they allowed 0.289 points per play, which was 18th. The 2021 defense only allowed 10.2 points per game and 0.154 points per play, both first by a mile. In 2022, I thought the defensive front and the linebacker spot did a pretty good job at reloading, but I think the secondary took a sizable step back that year compared to what it was in 2021. You saw that in, I think, the Peach Bowl against Ohio State. And I know that Alabama torched the 2021 defense in Atlanta that season. You know, if you're going to beat Georgia, you typically do it through the air. You don't do it playing their style of ball and trying to, out-grudge match them, out-wrestle them down low. However, I do think that 2021 secondary was better than the 2022 unit. And really the defense overall was. 2021 was just deeper, better, had more NFL talent. You get the point. But in 2022, they were still among the nation's best. They allowed 14.3 points per game, which was fifth, and 0.237 points per play, which was also fifth. In 2023, they were once again fifth in points per game, but they dropped further in points allowed per play, eighth, allowing 0.261. Last year, they allowed 0.318 points per play, which was 25th. And they were 23rd in scoring defense, allowing 20.6 points per game, which, if you think about it, is much worse than the 20 points per game they allowed in 2020, because in 2020, you did not have the constant rolling clock. Games were longer. So if you have to play a longer game, chances are you will allow more points than the same exact team as you that has to play a shorter game against similar competition. And Georgia that year had to play Alabama's 2020 offense. They had to play Florida's 2020 offense. Both of those offenses were far better than anything that Georgia had to play last year. So the regression defensively, I think, has been real. It's absolutely been real. I mean, you can't really deny that in my mind. And I will say that I believe this unit is going to take steps forward from last year. I think the team overall will, because the schedule, I think, is easier. The offense should be better, and they return enough up front at line. They return enough overall on defense to where if injuries just bounce the other way, they'll definitely be better. But still, look at this schedule. I mean, they are going to be tested, for example, by Alabama in Week 5, where Alabama should have a good offensive line. Quarterback shouldn't be worse in the passing department. They have epic receivers. Alabama can beat Georgia like how they beat them in 2024 and in 2021. Do it through the air, have good protection, and Alabama's defense is good enough to put pressure on this Georgia defense to get stops to give their offense multiple opportunities to win. Auburn has the receivers and the lines of scrimmage to potentially do damage to this unit. Ole Miss, if everything pans out, could as well, but I would not go that far. And this is not a schedule preview. I'm just walking you all through the schedule because that matters in the context of this defense's ceiling too. If the schedule's hard enough, the odds that this team is going to be completely healthy diminishes over time more drastically than it does for other schools. Florida's receivers are banged up, but Lagway's good enough to where he could test this defense too. And of course, Texas in Week 12 and Georgia Tech in Week 14 will have good offenses. There's a ton of good offenses that Georgia will have to play. So if Georgia does perform at a statistically higher clip than they did in 2024, that is a definite sign this unit has improved. I would venture that Tech, Florida, Auburn, Alabama, and by the time Georgia plays Texas, the Longhorns too will have better offenses than they did last season, at least by the time Georgia plays those respective teams. So the challenge on the offensive side of the ball, I believe, is greater across the board for Georgia's defense. They're going to have to face tougher offenses. So if they perform at a higher level, if they show flashes of that 2022, 2021 defense, then Georgia fans and Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann in that locker room are in for a treat, because a defense of that caliber in an era where depth has never been thinner, where the teams at the top have really never been younger in their two deep, that is a defense that can single-handedly win a team a national championship. So does this defense have a ceiling? I'm going to say no. However, I will add a caveat, a bullet point, an exception to that statement, which is because of how young this defense is. I think a better question that I could ask, and a question that I can't answer, is how often can this team play to its ceiling with some of the youth and inexperience they will have to deal with. Good thing Kirby Smart's the best head coach in America, and that Glenn Schumann's one of the better defensive coordinators in America. They will do what they can to put this defense in a position to excel. I love Georgia's defense. Why wouldn't you? All the players they have, all the athleticism, the fact that you get to watch dominant football, you get to watch future NFL athletes when you watch Georgia's defense. You also get to watch elite football being played most Saturdays that Georgia plays. Why is that? Because they play in a Power 4 conference. But whether or not you love watching Georgia, like I do, or maybe you prefer watching Kansas State, maybe you prefer watching Michigan State, maybe you love dominant football but in the Big Ten, so you like Ohio State, or you think Penn State will be dominant, so you like them, or you think Clemson's going to win it all, like Joel Klatt and my buddy, my friend, CFB Focus, who has his own preview magazine and who has covered Ohio State football in his life and college football for several years as an expert on the topic. No matter what you think, what you know about college football, if you just want to have fun, if you want to learn about the sport, if you want to try and put your brain power to use in a fun way, Squad Blitz is the perfect college football fantasy app for you. It is totally free. And unlike most fantasy apps where you have to draft individual players, and because college football is so large, that gets complicated fast. With Squad Blitz, you can draft position groups. You can draft sides of the ball. So for Georgia, if you're high on Georgia's defense, if you think that they don't have a ceiling this year and that they will play to their ceiling consistently, well, guess what? You can draft Georgia's defense if available, if you join a league. So I have a few leagues that I want you all to join, and if you don't want to join my league, but you still want to play college fantasy football, just click the links in the pinned comment and the one below it at the top of the comment section, and you can join one of my 2 available leagues. The first league is already filled up, and I imagine these will fill up too. Click the links, make sure on the referral section of the sign-up page to scroll down and hit my name. That will help me get paid because Squad Blitz is sponsoring my channel. Thanks to them for sponsoring my channel. I only agree to get sponsored by things that I think will help people either have fun or help them to be healthier, better, more productive human beings. And this goes in that fun category and even the better human beings category because you can have a pretty awesome and fun time with this app. Used it last year, had an absolute blast, and we're actually going to be having a draft in our first league tonight at 9 p.m. So make sure to sign up for Squad Blitz today. You can sign up at www.squadblitz.com, spelled exactly as it sounds, where there will be links to the Google Play or Apple App Store, and or you can sign up through the links at the top of the comment section, the pinned comment, where I have a link for my second fantasy league and third fantasy league. Drafts for those to be determined. Thank you for listening. Now, before we finish, let me thank Chris Lane for sending his super chats. Chris Lane, thank you for the $2 super chat. Says just because. I appreciate you. And then your second super chat, a $2 super chat as well. Florida and South Carolina keeps the SEC in cannibalism mode. Can totally see that. My SEC and Big Ten predictions will come out by the end of this coming week. I've been working on them. Yes, they've taken a long time, as things have per usual on the channel, but they are in the works. Going to be pretty similar to the ones that I had earlier in the summer, but there will probably be some differences there. I know that for my college football playoff projections, there may be a difference or two. Those are releasing this week. Thanks again for Squad Blitz for sponsoring this show for this college football season. Hope that we can work with them some more, and you'll continue to hear their name for at least the remaining preseason. So the rest of this week's shows, you'll hear them. And I think maybe next week too. Although I think that, I think that fantasy points this week count for week 0. Maybe I'm wrong, though. I'll have to figure that out. Still figuring some of that stuff out. But it's an awesome app to use. Already have a few leagues created. Please join them. Okay, now we can talk about my top 5 most impactful Nebraska players. We can talk about that. And that is going to be exciting because I did this video already, messed some things up, wanted to redo it. So, let's just straight up do it here. I think that Nebraska has a ton of wonderful players, a ton of them, that can bring Nebraska not just to being a top 25 caliber team and not just being a playoff contender, but actually making the college football playoff. My top 5 most impactful players for the Nebraska Cornhuskers this 2025 season are as follows: Dylan Raiola, Emmett Johnson, Dane Key, Rocco Spindler, and Sierra Wright. And I'm going to explain to you why that is. Let's start off with number 1, Dylan Raiola. Pretty obvious why he is the most impactful Cornhusker for 2025. He's the starting quarterback. He was a 5-star out of high school, true sophomore, 7-6 as a starter with the Cornhuskers, and brought them to their first bowl game since 2016. He completed 2/3 of his pass attempts, which for a true freshman with that offense was pretty impressive. A 129.9 passer rating and a 63.8 QBR. 13 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, averaging 6.9 yards per attempt with 2,819 passing yards. Dylan Raiola has epic arm strength. He showcased wonderful touch. Accuracy, I think, is something that will improve over time. Same with pocket awareness, which is something that he has struggled with before. Last year, for example, several plays. I can count a few of the sacks he took against Illinois in that overtime, a few plays that he had against Iowa, where you just have to throw the ball away, you have to protect the football, you have to be aware of where the defender is in proximity to you and how long your offensive line can hold up. Also, how long can you hold up? How long can you extend a play before they finally catch up to you and sack you? And that's, of course, adjusting to the speed of the game. I imagine with Dana Holgorsen as his offensive coordinator, worked with him for a few months last year, now he gets to work with him for a full preseason, I predict that Raiola will have 3,500 or more passing yards this year. He'll probably average around 8 yards per attempt. I think he'll double his passing touchdown total. I expect huge things from Dylan Raiola this fall, and I think he'll take a big step forward. Now it gets a little more complicated because now you can go in multiple different directions. For a lot of teams, quarterback is the most important position. In fact, on a team where you have a great quarterback, it always is the most important position. But most important doesn't always mean most impactful, if that makes any sense, and I think it does. Because impact, I think, implies both positive and negative. Some teams are good enough on their offensive supporting cast where the supporting cast or maybe a player on defense is more important than the quarterback. If they have a deep QB room, or maybe it's a known that the quarterback isn't super talented, for example. With Raiola, though, he's talented enough, has enough potential, and the team overall just isn't elite enough roster-wise. They're getting there. Look at Nebraska's 2027 class, but they're not an elite roster yet to where Raiola will have to do more things than he would at other schools to succeed. He'll have to carry a harder, heavier workload. But now we can go in different directions. I went with Dane Key at number 2, senior incoming transfer from Kentucky, and I went with him because he had 47 receptions last year with Brock Vandegrift, Cutter Boley, and Gavin Wimsatt as his quarterbacks at Kentucky. 715 receiving yards and 2 total touchdowns, both through the air. And I think with Raiola as his quarterback, with the offensive line that Nebraska has, with the schedule they have, with some other receivers surrounding Key, I think he's going to have a breakout year. Would not shock me if he had 1,000 receiving yards this season. He's impactful because he, at 6'3", 210 pounds, is big, physical, every single year, his statistics, his numbers have remained pretty steady as his receptions have increased. That is because every year he has been there, Kentucky's schedules have become tougher and the team has gotten worse. That's why. Straight up. Quarterback play every year has gotten worse too. As a freshman, he played with Will Levis. Sophomore, played with Devin Leary. Junior, Gavin Wimsatt, Brock Vandegrift, Cutter Boley. Clear downtrend. Clear downgrade year over year over year. So I think that Dane Key is finally going to have a quarterback upgrade from his previous year to his present year for the first time in his career, and that will pay massive dividends. Also, this ties into Nebraska's schedule, where a lot of teams they will be playing, I think, especially early in the season, will have more susceptible secondaries than defensive lines. Up next, we have Emmett Johnson. Speaking of someone who's going to have to go against defensive fronts, Johnson's a redshirt junior, Scott Frost recruit, 85 overall in the 2022 recruiting class. He's played in 21 games with Nebraska, with 117 carries, 598 yards, and 5 yards per carry last year, 5.1 technically, and 3 touchdowns, 2 through the air. I think that with a good offensive line, not a mediocre or bad one, which Nebraska had last season, with a good offensive line. We'll talk about a player on that offensive line up next. He should be very productive, especially with better play calling, and he's a running back who fits in Dana Holgerson's system, where he can't just run the football downhill, he can go to the outside, he can turn on the jets, he has some like ball carrier moves and athleticism and skill to him. He's not just a downfield back like Dante Dowdell was, no disrespect to him, and he can catch the ball out of the backfield. So he can be used as a Swiss Army knife, and he's a very versatile player. That plus the offensive line in front of him, Dylan Raiola, I think, will be at a point this year where he will be somewhat mobile. So maybe I'm reading into things too much, but if he is more mobile and athletic, you could maybe see some zone read plays or plays where there is more runner. There's more than one runner threatening the defense. And things like that especially will get Emmett Johnson, will get him more yards, will get him more explosive plays, will open up more opportunities through him in both the air and on the ground. I love what he's going to do this year. I'm very high on Emmett Johnson. Also very high on Rocco Spindler. Rocco Spindler is fourth and not higher than this because I think Nebraska already returned some good pieces on the offensive line. Now, they needed to upgrade there if they wanted to maximize the talent they already had on their roster to succeed in 2025. But they already brought back Henry Lutovsky. Teddy Prohaska is still healthy, so he's returned from a season where he was injured for all of last year, tragically. Hopefully he can stay healthy. They returned Justin Evans, Sam Sledge. They also brought in Elijah Pritchett from the portal. But they returned, I would say, probably 3 players, if not maybe 4, of starting caliber. The offensive line was already going to be better this year than it was last year. Adding Spindler and Pritchett, if Pritchett plays to his ceiling, and Pritchett maybe should have been on this list instead of Spindler because left tackle is more important than guard. But I also believe that Nebraska still wants to run that football, and they want to run it a lot and run it effectively. And they couldn't really do that last year. As bad as the passing attack was at times, I think Nebraska was a more effective passing team than running team. I mean, they could not run the football to save their life in Big Ten play last season. So Spindler changes that from my perspective. He has over 1,000 snaps in his career with Notre Dame. And last season, he had a 70.5 overall grade with 747 snaps. He stepped in Notre Dame's third game and didn't look back, playing in 14 games and playing rather well. And he's a high-level blue-chip player. He hasn't gone off to the NFL yet, but he's a great collegiate player, and I expect him to have an impact on this Nebraska interior offensive line and hold his own, hold Nebraska's water at the point of attack in pass blocking and in run blocking against several great defensive lines they will play. Michigan's will be a test. Penn State's will be a test. USC's, Minnesota's will be a test. Northwestern and Michigan State, UCLA, Iowa, none of those are pushovers either. Nebraska's going to be playing several fantastic defensive lines, especially on the interior. So that's going to be important, especially for a team that is going to want to pass the football and be more explosive, but will also want to run the ball and be able to control opponents on the ground. We also have Sear Wright. Sear Wright at 6 foot, 180 pounds, another player out of the 2021 class who is highly ranked, but just hasn't gone off to the NFL yet and had to transfer. He did a wonderful job at Nebraska last year. Really impressive player. I think that he will be an All-American caliber corner this year. He had 535 snaps with the Cornhuskers last year, a 72.2 defensive grade, and he had a 69 coverage grade and an 85 run defense grade. If the coverage can get better, I know Bly Hill for Nebraska got hurt, but it would be helpful for Nebraska to at least be able to lock down one side of the field, because their secondary last year was the weaker part of the defense. I know the defensive front at times was inconsistent, but they had better players and were more consistent than the Nebraska secondary. I mean, think about the Illinois game. Was that a Nebraska's defensive front, or did Nebraska's defensive front get tired because the secondary kept getting gashed through the air by Luke Altmaier, Pat Bryant, and Barry Lunney Jr.'s play calling? What about the Iowa game? I mean, who allowed all the broken tackles? Wasn't the D-line, that was the defensive backfield that let Caleb Johnson get the one touchdown that kept Iowa hanging around in the game. How did Wisconsin score? Through the air, not through the ground. Similar with USC, and USC had an awesome rushing attack last year. So for the secondary to take a step forward, especially from a player like Sear Wright, that would mean a lot with all the defensive line, with all that they lose. Now, finally, when I look at this unit, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but especially talking about this offensive line, Justin Evans, Rocco Spindler, Henry Lutovsky, Elijah Pritchett, Teddy Prohaska. Any and all of these players, any and all of them could be impactful players. I chose to go with Spindler because he's a transfer, because I think he'll be the best offensive lineman on the team. He'll have a higher floor than any of these guys and a ceiling that is probably second, if not first on the team. But any of these offensive linemen could be on here, because with what Nebraska has in Raiola, what they bring in at wide receiver, both in the coach to develop the players and the players to succeed with their natural talents and proven production, what will truly open up this Nebraska team, I think, will be the offensive line. And whether it plays closer to its ceiling, or whether it's inconsistent again, or plays to its floor. Those are my top 5 most impactful Nebraska players for 2025. Again, Dylan Raiola, Dane Key, Emmett Johnson, Rocco Spindler, Sear Wright. Honorable mention to Elijah Pritchett, left tackle, to Cam Lenhart, defensive lineman, and I would also say another honorable mention probably has to go to one of the linebackers. I'd probably say Dasan McCullough, just given his talent and how good he was when healthy at both Indiana and Oklahoma. Having him playing at full capacity would make him a game wrecker on a defense that needs game wreckers. Okay, now we can talk about Nebraska's offensive line. This is a unit that will make teams eat corn this season. Before we get to that, actually, let me read another super chat. This from Based4L. Thank you for the $2 super chat. I really appreciate it. We're up to 10 likes, guys. Let's get up to 20 likes before the end of the stream. And we're up to $6 in super chats. If we can make it up to double that at the end of the stream, let's do that. Again, if you want me to go live for Farmageddon, we need $50 or more in super chats by the end of the stream. We're already $6 there, just need 44 more if you guys want that. Nebraska's offensive line is going to be a unit that takes big steps forward and is going to punish opposing defenses this year. This is a unit that will make defenses eat corn. The Nebraska Cornhusker offensive line. They will take pieces of corn and they will make you eat them. They will make you eat all of it. Not just the good parts, not just that, but the leftovers. They will make you uncomfortable. They will stuff you full. They will shove you down and they will push you around. And I know that there's a lot of emotion in that statement and there's a lot of hype, but I am a believer in this offensive line. And I have, I believe, evidence to back that up. So therefore, it's not just an emotional take. I think a lot of this is centered in reality. They return Justin Evans, who had a 69.1 PFF grade with 877 snaps. When you have that many snaps and that high of a grade playing in the Big Ten, you are a good player. They also return Henry Lutovsky with a 74.1 PFF grade at guard with, again, another player over 700 snaps, 753 snaps. Teddy Prohaska was injured for all of 2024, didn't play, but he was Nebraska's best offensive tackle in 2023. He is big, long. Imagine if he's healthy and plays well this year, he will be picked in the 2026 NFL draft. So you have a potential all Big Ten caliber player at tackle if healthy. Elijah Pritchett is the other tackle. This time came in through the portal. He had a 56.9 PFF grade with 619 snaps in 2024. Didn't play well at Alabama. Had to leave, transfer out. Doesn't sound like he's doing too well based on the information I have, but he is a bigger body with a high ceiling, and Nebraska allowed a significant amount of pressures last year. Raiola took a good amount of sacks. The Big Ten overall did not really field elite pass-blocking offensive lines outside of, I would say, Oregon last season, and at times Ohio State. And even then, that was debatable. I mean, look at the Rose Bowl where Oregon got sacked a bunch, although I would blame that on their receivers not getting separation, Dylan Gabriel having limited upside. As for Ohio State, they had good pass blocking from one of their tackles in Donovan Jackson and Simmons before Simmons tragically went down. And you also have to take into account their supporting cast was so athletic and Howard was so good in the pocket that they didn't need good protection to have a good functioning offense. So Nebraska was no exception to that last year, where a lot of Big Ten offensive lines were better in run blocking than pass blocking. Nebraska's wasn't one of those either. They struggled in run blocking too. But they've upgraded size, they return more experience, and this is also year 3 of Donovan Raiola, of Matt Rule, and then year 1 of an offensive coordinator in Dana Holgorsen, who is light years ahead of what Marcus Satterfield brought. Rocco Spindler is the player I'm paying attention to on this offensive line because he's transferring in from Notre Dame, where he has been coached by Joe Rudolph, who I view as a legend at offensive line coaching. He is one of the best, if not the best offensive line coach in America. He's up there with Phil Trotween. He's up there with Kyle Flood. Those offensive line coaches. He's in that pedigree. Spindler's been trained by him. Was he going to start this year for Notre Dame? No, but Notre Dame's offensive line is among the best in America. There's no shame in that. He's going to come to Nebraska. He's starting at guard, and he had, once again, just like all of the interior Nebraska players, over 700 snaps. So just think about the experience this room has, the chemistry that these players on the interior in Evans and Lutovsky have. Prohaska was hurt, yes, but he's played under Rule, played with some of these offensive linemen, and then Spindler is a vet. And Spindler is someone who, along with Pritchett, transferred in fairly early. These are not spring portal additions. These were winter portal additions. So they've had a whole preseason to acclimate to Nebraska's staff, to their culture, their roster, to their teammates. I love this unit. They allowed 27 sacks last year. Factoring in Raiola's improved pocket presence, I assume that he is going to get faster in both his processing and his release. He'll catch up to the speed of the game, transitioning from a true freshman to a more experienced, less green sophomore. That combined with a superior line, I imagine will bring the sack total down. The pressure total, I think, will go down. And look, Nebraska last season, even with Dante Dowdell, who is a power back, and Emmett Johnson, who is awesome. I mean, he averaged 5 yards per carry, which with this offensive line was pretty impressive because Nebraska's offensive line last year helped the Cornhuskers run for 3.8 yards per carry. That's horrible. Especially with a team like Nebraska's history, where they used to not care about passing the ball, and they just ran the option, and you couldn't stop it, and they ran all over people. And they were known for being, that working class, farmer work ethic developmental program. For that offensive line to perform that poorly last season was pretty pathetic. It was. I think they're going to take drastic steps forward this year, especially in run blocking, with what they have on the interior, both coming in and what they have returning, along with better play calling, and I think a better running back starting. Yes, I believe Emmett Johnson is better than Dante Dowdell. You look at this schedule with what the Cornhuskers have. They play Cincinnati week 1. Cincinnati has a player in Dante Corleone on the defensive line. They have some good players on the defensive line at linebacker on defense overall. This is going to be a great early test, better than UTEP in week 1 last year, better than Minnesota in week 1 in 2023. This is going to be a good test for this Nebraska offensive line. Michigan in week 4 is going to be an even bigger, better test. Yes, they lost their 2 NFL defensive tackles, but they have, I think, plenty of NFL players on the defensive line. None with the ceiling of Graham or Grant. Their defensive ends may not even have the ceiling of Josiah Stewart. But Michigan, in theory, should be a little deeper than last year. Overall, the unit will be worse, but it will still be a force to be reckoned with. And I wonder, and I'm excited to see the contrast and juxtaposition between how the 2023 Nebraska-Michigan game went in the trenches versus how it will go this year. Can't wait to see that. Michigan State and Minnesota have good enough players around the defensive line, especially Minnesota, who I think is deeper and better than the Spartans, to where they could prove some tests too. Michigan State has Grady Kelly and Jalen Thompson. Minnesota has Mo Amunde, who transferred in from Purdue. And they also have some all Big Ten caliber players like Anthony Smith, Jalen Logan Redding, Devin Eastern. It's one of the deeper Minnesota defensive lines that I can remember. You also got to think about USC, who's upgraded their size, bringing in Keyshawn Silver, Devin Tompkins. You also got Anthony Lucas, and also, forgetting his name, Cameron Fountain. How could I forget Cameron Fountain? He was almost a 5-star out of high school and did pretty well last year. Hard to remember all those names, but that's why you have notes on your screen, right? And then, of course, you have Penn State and you have Iowa. And Penn State with Zane Durant, Denai Dennis Sutton, Alonzo Ford, Ty Blanding. It sounds like Jim Knowles really loves this defensive line, and I believe him there. And they also have a great front with players that should be able to get to the quarterback, such as Amari Campbell, a blitzing linebacker. And then Iowa, Ethan Hurkett, Max Llewellyn, Aaron Graves. Iowa's had Nebraska's number with their defensive line versus Nebraska's offensive line in recent memory. There are plenty of great defensive lines here, defenses overall, but especially defensive fronts, to test this offensive line. Am I going to tell you right now they will beat all of them? Heck no. But I am going to tell you that for the first time in eons, you are going to see Nebraska win some of these battles decisively, especially as the game goes on, and for the first time again in a while, in what feels like forever, Nebraska's depth is going to wear down some of these units that, whether overall or just on defense compared to Nebraska's offense, their opponents do not have the same depth or experience or raw talent that Nebraska does. I think they'll overpower some of these teams that will be tests for them. That's why overall I'm high on Nebraska this year. I do think they will go over their win total of 7.5, and I have to tell you the offensive line is a big part of the reason why. This unit will improve, and I would expect Nebraska to run for 4.5 or more yards per carry this year, so almost a full yard more per carry than last year. And with the new OC and the passing game being superior, therefore opening up the ground, we would assume, that might be a little bit conservative. Now let's move on to Alabama's offensive line. This is where Elijah Pritchett came from. So this is, I think, kind of a nice transition that we have here. Very nice transition. Reading the chat right now. Thank you for all of our moderators tonight for hopping in. Kels14, Chris Lane, Moody Meatball. Thank you, all of you, for being on here, for being moderators, and for helping out the channel. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, just looking at the views and numbers tonight, it's totally better to go live at 6 p.m. Totally, than it is to go live at 10 a.m. But hey, 2 live shows in a day. We like to push ourselves here on College Football with Sam. Let's talk about the Alabama offensive line. You have all the talent in the world. The question is, what will you do with it? You know, there's a famous saying that I think has been said to be the origin in many families. I know my family says that, you know, your cousins have a saying, and I highly doubt it originated from them, but it's good they believe in the saying nonetheless because it's so true. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I cannot think of a better opening statement to talk about the Alabama offensive line. They have all the talent, all the size, all the measurables, all the length in the world. They have potentially the nation's best offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubb, a head coach in Kalen DeBoer, who I think when he is at his peak, manages football games second to none. They have awesome wide receivers on the outside. When Jam Miller is healthy, and we should all be praying for his health, they will have great running backs behind him. They have it all. The question is, will they put it together? Because last year they didn't. This offensive line last year had its ups, had its downs. That's why they had to use the portal entering this season, and why some players had to transfer out, such as Elijah Pritchett at tackle. They had to bring in Cam Dewberry. Parker Brailsford they had to bring in after the 2023 season, when Seth McLaughlin went to Ohio State. Parker Brailsford came in from Washington along with Kalen DeBoer and his offensive line coach at the time, Scott Huff, who then went on to the Seattle Seahawks, where he still is. Same with Ryan Grubb, but then Ryan Grubb got let go. He's back with Alabama, where he originally was for a few weeks when Kalen DeBoer was hired. Again, you have all the talent in the world here. Brailsford stepped in, I believe, as either a redshirt freshman or true freshman for Washington in 2023, and he commanded the offensive line to a Joe Moore Award, and a unit that pass blocked at an elite level for Michael Penix that helped Washington go 14-1. Earned 14 wins, only loss was to the national champions, the Michigan Wolverines that year, who also beat Alabama. And that's a game I also want to bring up here in relationship to this offensive line. Because Michigan had one of the best defenses of the 2020s. It was better than any defense fielded in 2020, 2022, or 2024. The only defense I think that has an argument to be superior to that Michigan defense was 2021 Georgia. I would put it 2021 Georgia at 1, 2023 Michigan at 2, and probably 2024 Ohio State at 3 is how I would rank the defenses. And then several other 2023 defenses, 2023 Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa, 2022 Georgia, 2022 Iowa, 2022 Illinois would be up there. And I could go through that list all day because I love defense. I love talking about elite defenses, but I also love talking about elite offensive lines. And Alabama that year against Michigan, they were able to beat them at times in run blocking. With their size, with their athleticism, they played hard, they fought hard, and they played well. And that was in the ground. But through the air, they couldn't protect Jalen Milroe at all. And part of that had to do with Milroe, but part of that also had to do with the offensive line. You look at 2021, again under Saban, where against that legendary Georgia defense, they were able to protect Bryce Young. They were able to open up lanes in the ground. And yet, Bryce Young took nearly 50 sacks that year. Very inconsistent unit. This has been the case ever since Alabama won the Joe Moore Award in 2020. The offensive line has been a roller coaster relative to the talent on deck. Can this unit be different? That's my question. I have a lot of people I know who I trust who are high on Caden Proctor. 70.8 PFF grade with 639 snaps. I'm high on him too. He'll be a first rounder most likely in the 2026 NFL draft. He has his tackle spot locked down, and I think that he will be wonderful this season. He is the player with the least amount of questions on this offensive line. But then you look at Wilkin Formby with a 57.6 PFF grade, 291 snaps. Cam Dewberry's transferring in from A&M, where he had a PFF grade in the 50s with under 300 snaps. Jaden Roberts at a 67.3 PFF grade with 502 snaps. Brailsford at a 66.4 PFF grade with 775 snaps. They lost their best guard and best offensive lineman, I would say Tyler Booker, to the NFL, where he was picked in the first round. And then they lost starting tackle Elijah Pritchett, who transferred out and whose playing time diminished as the season went on because he continued to struggle. I think he started the year off injured and a little dinged up and just never really recovered from that. This unit, and Cole Kublik and others who cover the SEC and offensive line will tell you, this is a very talented unit. It will be one of the better units in college football. But at Alabama, much like Ohio State, much like Georgia, and emerging powers Texas and Oregon, not even really emerging, but for those doubters out there, yeah, they'll call them emerging powers. Good is not good enough. The expectation is to be elite. And that is an area that with this offensive line, they have the potential. The question is, what will they do with it? If they are elite, I will tell you, Alabama could win the SEC. They could win the national championship. Actually, I'll go a step further. If they are elite, they probably do win the SEC. If they play to their ceiling, and this is a Joe Moore Award caliber O-line, with the receivers they have, with what they have at running back, the depth at tight end, and the defense they have, along with the coordinators and the head coach in Kalen DeBoer, they will probably win the SEC because Texas and Georgia are just inexperienced enough, just young enough, and just shaky enough, both of them actually on the offensive line, especially after the injury Texas took at tackle, to where Alabama can outlast those teams as the season goes on. However, if they continue to be inconsistent like they were last year, the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that, we had a lot of NFL talent, but in college you were not really a dominant unit at a consistent level, this team can miss the college football playoffs again. Or they reach the playoffs, but maybe they lose in the first round or the second round. They don't go to Atlanta. And now you're not back at square one and you're better than you were last year, but you're still trying to chase eliteness and catch up to where you once were. You've still fallen behind relative to where you were at the end of the Saban tenure, which the expectation for DeBoer and Alabama shouldn't be to play at the level of Saban. That's unrealistic. But Saban's ending tenure, his final years, I think are more attainable than many of his seasons in the 2010s, where talent across the sport was more spread out, and that affected Alabama, and his coordinator hires, his coaching staffs, and really overall rosters, even though per blue chip ratio they were just as talented, weren't really as good as his prior rosters in the 2010s and also that 2020 team that went undefeated and was considered analytically to be one of the best teams of all time. There's a lot of wiggle room for this Alabama offensive line, and I talk about it different than other offensive lines because of the expectations. So Nebraska, for example, pretty low expectations for a blue blood on the offensive line. Just be good. If you're good, team's happy. That's why Pritchett can go there and Pritchett can start, because they just need to be good. If you're Alabama, you need to be great on the offensive line. You need to be elite. I would pick this unit right now to be great. But is it near elite? Is it a Joe Moore Award offensive line? I have to see that in order to believe it. I know they have the talent too, but they've always had the talent too. And we'll just have to see how they operate this year. They'll have tests, believe me. They will have tests against Georgia. They will be tested against South Carolina with Dylan Stewart. And Auburn, is their defensive line perfect? No. But they have some players there. DJ Durkin runs a good system. Oklahoma will test them, very much so, with Dominic Williams, with our Mason Thomas. LSU, if their defensive line pans out, Tennessee, if theirs pans out, Missouri's defense should be mean. We'll get a pretty good picture of who this team is, I would say, by early October, if not late September. I mean, even before they play Georgia, with Florida State and Wisconsin, if Florida State and Wisconsin, if their defenses pan out well, the players there develop and they play at a good level, we may figure out who this offensive line and team is overall before they play against Georgia on the road in week 5. All right, now we can talk about Drew Aller in Penn State. This is going to be very fun because I'm high on Aller. I am a Drew Aller supporter. I view myself as a Drew Aller truther. And yeah, Max Ellis, one comment I'll respond to before we resume. They are massive. So how did they struggle so much? I think that has to do a lot with technique, discipline, play calling, schematics, the fact they're playing really good defenses. And size isn't always everything. It just isn't. Sometimes you can be too big. Look at Florida's defensive lineman who's being held out of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice for being too overweight as a classic example. All right, let's talk about Drew Aller in Penn State. Drew Aller is one of the best quarterbacks in America. And there's a lot of people who will hear that statement and they will shriek or they'll react in a very negative way. And to a certain degree, I understand that. To a certain degree, I get that. But I would say, looking at his projection and how he has performed thus far, I would caution people against pushing back too hard against the idea of Aller being one of the better quarterbacks in America. Drew Aller is on track to being round 1, pick 1 in the 2026 NFL draft. He's on track to being that. Arch Manning won't declare until probably the 2027 NFL draft. Klubnik could be round 1, pick 1. Same with Levitt, but Aller has better physical tools than them. Better physical traits, more height, more weight, better arm strength. And Aller last year had the worst receiver group of the bunch. He did. He also played the toughest competition of the bunch. And this year, he upgrades at wide receiver, bringing in Trevor Pena, nearly a 1,000-yard wide receiver at about 900 receiving yards. Devontae Ross at 1,000 receiving yards at Troy. Kyron Hudson at, I think, 300 or 400 at USC. They bring in receivers. Kotelnicki's entering year 2, and his entire offensive line comes back. Penn State's running backs return, and while they lose Tyler Warren, and I don't think they'll completely replace him this year, Luke Reynolds is a freak athlete, and Khalil Dinkins is a really good blocker and also a really good receiving tight end as well. Aller will take another step forward. His path is on the same track, statistical improvement-wise, as J.J. McCarthy. It is. So J.J. McCarthy, I know in 2022, which was his second year starting, or his first year starting, that he had that game against Ohio State and also that game against TCU where he threw multiple touchdowns, had a lot of deep balls. The deep passing attack came alive at different points during that game. And Aller has not had that yet. However, when Aller played Ohio State last year, it was Ohio State's best defense since 2019, if not since 2016. And it could have been better than either of those defenses. Could have been. Not saying it was, just that there's an argument for that. It was one of the best Ohio State defenses of the 21st century. Some would say it was the best. The Ohio State defense J.J. McCarthy played in 2022 was one of the inferior Ohio State defenses, definitely in the bottom half, if not far worse than that, of Ohio State defenses in the 21st century. So McCarthy had some big wins, had some big breakout moments that Aller has not yet had. However, he did not play the same defenses that Aller did in those big games. And I would argue Aller's supporting cast and coaching staff up until recently, as in this year or at the best last year, was never as good as McCarthy's was the minute he stepped on campus. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but I think that in looking at how they both play in the Big Ten, they don't have elite receivers, but they have wonderful offensive lines, good running backs, great play callers. They have a good defense, a great defense to give the offense multiple possessions to figure things out. And then statistically, McCarthy in 2022, in his second year at Michigan, first year starting, had a passer rating in the 150s. Aller, third year starting, passer rating in the 150s. And they made a similar jump from year one, I think, to year two in the comparison. So taking out Aller's freshman year. Aller is, I think, on the similar path to McCarthy, but lagging by about a year. Don't know exactly why that was a higher ranked player out of high school. Could have been a misevaluation. It could be also that Aller has had worse receiver cores than McCarthy has ever had up until this year, and also that Mike Yurcich was probably a worse play caller than Jim Harbaugh and Sharon Moore. We may never know the exact answer. But Aller is 23-6 as a starter. He's a winner. He completed 66.5% of his throws. He had a 159 about passer rating, a 77.5 QBR, a PFF grade that was fairly high and admirable, believe in the 80s. And when I look at his passing numbers, 3,327 passing yards, 8.4 yards per attempt, 24 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He also had 302 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns, and he took 19 sacks. And Penn State allowed around 90 pressures last year. They allowed a ton of pressures in 16 games. It was not the best pass blocking offensive line whatsoever. It was a weakness of their team last year, actually, was their pass blocking from the tackles. What do I expect from Drew Aller this season? I expect him, with the receivers he has, the schedule he has, the staff surrounding him, the running backs, offensive line, and another year of experience and training. I believe that Aller will pass for over 3,500 yards for sure. I think that his average yards per pass attempt number will be, I'd say at 9, anywhere from the 9 to 10 range. I think his TD to interception ratio last year was a 3-1. I think it will at least be a 4-1, if not 5-1 this season. That could be a little bit too conservative, just because I know Aller, who's typically safe with the football last year, had some pretty weird and uncharacteristic turnovers. So against Oregon, he threw 2 picks. Against Ohio State, he actually only threw 1, despite throwing 2 against Oregon and then 3 against USC. Had some pretty weird games. So the Oregon and USC game were viewed as some of his better games, and yet in those 2 games he had 5 combined turnovers, more than half his total interceptions on the season. This schedule sets up nicely. So against Nevada, FIU, and Villanova, weeks 1, 2, and 3, and entering that week 4 bye, that gives Aller almost a month's time to further bond and build chemistry with his wide receivers, all of whom have come from the portal. He already, I would expect him to have good chemistry with his running backs, offensive line, and tight ends. And he knows Kotelnicki's system pretty well because it's his second full season in that system. Oregon in week 5 is the perfect test. It's in the whiteout. It's at home. Oregon is 2 time zones removed. The average Penn State player intuitively, I will calculate this for the preview for this game. The average Penn State starter and 2 player, I would venture, is anywhere from 2 to 4 years older than the Oregon player in that position. So Penn State has all of these inherent advantages against Oregon. And yet Oregon will be good enough on the defensive line, linebacker, DB, and offense, anywhere there, to where they should compete with Penn State much better than most teams on their schedule. They'll play them much closer. So that'll be a moment for Aller to potentially shine. I think he does shine in that game. UCLA, Northwestern, those will be games where I think Aller's going to be stat padding a good amount. At Iowa will be tough, but if the supporting cast comes together and if Aller takes a similar jump that he did from year 2 to year 3, from year 3 to year 4, he should be able to give Penn State a handy win in Kinnick. Win with a sizable margin. Now, Ohio State on the road in Week 10 is going to be Aller's biggest test and Penn State's biggest test of the year. Let's just say that and move on. Indiana will have a good defense. Michigan State on the road when MSU's coming off a bye with the staff they have. They could throw some looks at Penn State that maybe make the game closer than Penn State wants it to be. Nebraska could have good players on defense, and Rutgers' defense was so bad last year at run defense that I imagine they're going to regress to the mean and be a better defense this year than they were last year. There's a lot of anywhere from okay to even potentially elite defenses on this schedule. However, there's more okay than elite. They have the 3 cupcake games early, and with the returning experience, the talent that Aller has, the fact that he has really 2 quarterback coaches, and last year I don't think he had anyone with that title, so he's getting more individual attention and mentorship. It's also his second year in the system, and this will be the best wide receiver core that he has ever had. Leads me to believe that Drew Aller this season will put up impressive numbers, will be a top 5 quarterback at the minimum in efficiency, and he will play himself into that round 1, pick 1 conversation for the 2026 NFL Draft. Okay, wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Looking at the chat here, it's good to see that you were all active. Again, guys, let's try to get up to 20 likes. Thank you so much for viewing this stream. We have a few more topics to get to before we got to get on out of here. Lastly, just want to say, if we get up to $50 in Super Chat, we will be going live for Farmageddon. Iowa State versus Kansas State. Consider that if you want me to be live and host a watch party for that game. If not, that's absolutely totally cool. Thank you for all the support you've already shown with the multiple $2 Super Chats from Chris Lane and also from Based for Life, I believe is the acronym there. It's Based 4L, so I'd assume that's Based for Life. Now let's talk about the Ohio State linebackers who are featured on the cover of this live show. What do I think about the Ohio State linebackers? Well, Ohio State has one of the most athletic linebacker units in college football. Not just linebacker duo, but units too. The unit that anchored the 2024 defense, that lost Cody Simon to the NFL, a wonderful player. He was an X-Factor player last season. His play bordered on alien level play relative to college standards. Not alien in terms of talent, Simon was never that, but just the way that he was playing made him one of the best linebackers in America last year. And yet, they could improve in 2025. How can they improve, you ask? Well, they have Arvell Reese at middle linebacker projected to start. He was the highest graded returning linebacker, is the highest graded returning linebacker per PFF in this group, with a 76.4 PFF grade, 305 snaps, 4 tackles for loss. He trails Sonny Styles, who has 11 tackles for loss and 897 snaps. Styles at a 71.4 PFF grade. You also have some players in middle linebacker Peyton Pierce and outside linebacker Riley Pettyjohn, who I would expect to have some playing time. Pettyjohn shedded his black stripe, so he's officially part of the Ohio State team. Pierce last year only had 31 snaps with a 63.9 PFF grade, but I imagine with another year in the system, being coached under Laurinaitis, that he will have a coming out party of sorts, being that third guy, and I think playing at a pretty high level. Pettyjohn, you never want to say that a freshman's going to ball out immediately. That's very tough. Takes a rare type of freshman to do. I won't predict Pettyjohn to do that, but I will predict him to be good if needed. If they need him to come in and play, he will play at a good level. And you also have Garrett Stover, who last year played on special teams, 60.8 PFF grade with just 1 snap on defense. You have some depth there at the linebacker spot. Is it as deep as Georgia's linebacker room? I wouldn't say so. I don't think it's as deep as Texas's either, but those are also some of the best linebacker groups in America. Nothing to be ashamed of there to just be top 5 and not necessarily be the unanimous number 1. Ohio State already has that at wide receiver. They already have that with the best safety in America, best defensive player in America, and Caleb Downs. This linebacker group it's amazing. I believe that Arvell Reese boldly will be the best linebacker in the group. I think he is a more natural linebacker than Sonny Styles is. And I think that being at that middle linebacker position and being, I know Sonny Styles is the block O, but I think Styles, well, a good linebacker, definitely a future pro, just isn't quite the level that Reese could be. And maybe some of that's intuitive. Maybe I'm wrong there. I think Styles will be a near elite, if not elite linebacker this year. Arvell Reese, I'm pretty sure, is going to be the elite best linebacker of the group. A little bit of a bold prediction there. Pierce will be kind of an honorable mention all Big Ten caliber linebacker. Having that as your third linebacker is pretty impressive. Speaks to the playable depth that this unit has. And Pettyjohn is a freshman to shred your black stripe already. And for Patricia to want to run this 3-4 defense if possible. Now, oftentimes one of those four linebackers is an outside linebacker blitzer, a pass rusher. So I'm not saying that 3-4 means that Pettyjohn will always be on the field, but if they need him and if he's good enough, he will get opportunities to showcase his talents in Big Ten play. And Ohio State gets tested week 1 right out of the gate against Texas. The Ohio State defensive front has an opportunity against the Texas offensive line. Not really from the standpoint of their defensive line against Texas's offensive line, because Texas's offensive line is actually more experienced than Ohio State's defensive line, and based on what I see and what I've watched, probably would have the upper hand just on that sole matchup. But once you factor in Ohio State's linebackers, I think that's where the tide can quickly turn in Ohio State's favor. Where Ohio State has linebackers such as Arvell Reese that if they wanted to be, they could play defensive end. They could put on an extra 10, 15 pounds, be that 6'3", 6'4", 255, 260-pound defensive end, outside linebacker, edge if they wanted to, and play on the defensive line. They could. They have that size there. They have the athleticism. They have that sideline-to-sideline speed. And that's going to be a great game for them to showcase their talents. And if Ohio State wins, I think the linebackers will be a huge part of their victory against Texas. Same if they beat Penn State. Same if they beat Michigan. This linebacker core is one of the most important units of the Ohio State team. It is, because linebacker, I think, is one of those positions, given its the nickname quarterback of the defense, it's very hard to mitigate if you have offensive line play that's shaky. Look at Penn State last year, where their linebackers struggled to tackle, especially Tony Rojas, who wasn't healthy. Penn State had a hard time mitigating that. They did. And you saw that in some of their bigger games. Ohio State, I don't think will have that problem this year. Their questions on defense relate much more to the defensive line, and I would say even much more so relate to corner than they do to linebacker, and certainly not safety with Downs there. So this is a unit that is going to, talent-wise, improve. We'll see in terms of collegiate play if it's better than last year's linebacker group, because by the end of the year, it was one of the best. We'll have to see if it improves there, but it certainly can. And this is going to be a linebacker group where, look, I think they're going to do a really good job against, obviously, Grambling State, Ohio, Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Purdue, UCLA, and Rutgers. And in 75% of their games, they will do what they want to do. Doesn't mean Ohio State won't maybe lose in one of those road upsets, but it won't be the linebacker's fault. Where this unit is really going to need to play to its ceiling and showcase its talents is against Texas in Week 1, Penn State in Week 10, and Michigan in the game in Week 14. And I think in all of those games, honestly, they will. And in much of those games, I like their odds of matching up well with their opponents. Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese have a great chance to showcase their talents at a national level this year. Styles already has, and now with the Block O, he'll do a better job, and I think the spotlight will be more on him than it ever has been. And Arvell Reese, with his talent and the freakish athleticism that he has, I like what I see out of him and what Patricia has in that linebacker group. We can now talk about USC's defensive line. And then we have another defensive line to talk about, the Clemson defensive line. and the Miami secondary. We'll probably get out of here at 8 p.m. And videos from today's live show and tonight's live show will be up both tonight and tomorrow. So that's a lot of content out. We're going to produce a lot of content this week, so I'm going to just really blitz all of these videos and get them out fairly quickly. So there will be more content in the form of these clips. Just pay attention to those. Oh, I got a Kansas State fan in here. Hey, K-State fan 101. We're not previewing Farmageddon tonight, but we will be previewing Farmageddon tomorrow. So come back on. I love seeing that we got a Kansas State fan in here. That's awesome. USC's defensive line is something that has been talked about among their fan base for a few months now. It's been the focal point, I believe, of USC's preseason hype for those who are hyping up USC in 2025. Let me repeat that. USC's defensive line has been the focal point of their believers in the 2025 preseason. When was the last time you ever heard something like that? I don't know. I will come out and say within 30 seconds of this segment beginning that I think this is probably the best USC defensive line since the Pete Carroll era. If I'm wrong, please tell me why in the comment section below. I love the size and athleticism and talent this unit has. They are deeper than they were last year, and they are certainly in the starting unit, the starting four, superior talent-wise and have a much higher ceiling and a higher floor than they did last season. Last season, USC was starting defensive linemen well under 300 pounds, and by D linemen, I mean defensive tackles. And their defensive ends were inconsistent, and they suffered injuries pretty early on. Now, with better strength and conditioning, with better size and better depth, I think that people who are hyped and high on USC, I'm one of those people, by the way, have a right to point to this defensive line being the focal point for their hype, the origin point of their belief in Lincoln Riley and USC this season. Now, for me, that has a lot more to do, and I imagine this is the case with a lot of USC believers, with the staff, which also ties into this defensive line. If you had a different defensive line coach with this talent, I may not be as high on this group because it's not naturally one of the best defensive lines in all of college football. It's just not quite as talented, as experienced, as old. You get the point. But with Eric Henderson coaching that unit, I give a lot of benefit of the doubt, and I have a lot of trust in what this unit can produce. You got Keyshawn Silver at nose tackle, Jamal Jarrett behind him, Devin Tompkins at defensive tackle, and Anthony Lucas and Cameron Fountain, both at defensive end. So this defensive tackle group has multiple players over 300 pounds. Multiple, for the first time in a while for the Trojans. Multiple playable defensive tackles over 300 pounds. Silver at a 60.2 PFF grade with 312 snaps and a sack at Kentucky. Not great, but I imagine with a better position coach and a better defensive coordinator, he'll improve at USC relative to where he was at Kentucky. Jamal Jarrett only had 69 snaps at Georgia with a 53 PFF grade. Transferred, obviously, for playing time reasons. He's a massive human being. I think 330 pounds about there. Again, with good coaching, with a good DC, I would expect him to play a significant role as a backup nose tackle. Tompkins had 400 snaps and 1.5 sacks last year with a 62.4 PFF grade. With a lot of these players in Lynn's second year, so he has another year, double the time as last year to install the system and teach it to these players, and he's finally getting in some of his recruits. I'm going to give him a lot of benefit of the doubt, like I did with Jim Knowles in 2023, when some were questioning Knowles after a bad end to the 2022 season at Ohio State. I thought, well, it's his second year. They return almost everyone defensively. They should be one of the best defenses in America. And boom, it's a pretty whiffed snap right there, like USC in close games last year. I think we can all laugh about that because I highly doubt USC is going to be that bad in close games again. Riley has a 70% win percentage in his career with a little tilde before that. So it's around 70% career a win percentage in close games, in one-score games. That's Riley. That's Lincoln Riley right there. And that's the schemer. That's the elite play caller where he can help his team wiggle out of close, competitive, tight situations. So since last year wasn't that, it went against the norm, I think regression to the mean actually helps USC in 2025. And defensively, that should be the case too. Lynn helped USC's defense dramatically improve in year one, just like Jim Knowles did at Ohio State. Imagine what it could be this year. Now, I don't know if they have the talent that 2023 Ohio State defense did. I don't. But I imagine that it isn't so far behind that USC is incapable of fielding a top 10 defense this year. This defense, I will tell you right now, huge part of it's the defensive line. They can be top 10 this year. This can be a top 10 defense. Lucas is returning with 231 snaps and a 65.7 PFF grade. He got hurt pretty early. And I know that Bud Elliott on the Cover 3 podcast was giving him a lot of praise and giving him flowers last season early. I'm going to give him some flowers too. I trust Elliott and his evaluations, and I also trust the fact that he's still starting with USC, and that obviously Lynn and Henderson trust him to start. Fountain was a young player last year, 71.3 PFF grade. He comes back with 2 snaps and 48 snaps. He will play more this year. He's bigger, stronger, less green, older. All those things help, especially since he was a top 100 player out of high school. You also got to remember Jakeem Stewart, who is going to be a true freshman who will be involved in this rotation too. On USC's defensive line, there's so much to love about this unit, and USC's schedule is easier than last year's in terms of travel, so that means less fatigue, because jet lag and having to travel as much as a lot of these West Coast schools do, that wears on the players. That gives these players fatigue that a lot of schools couldn't deal with properly. They have to sacrifice to be in the Big Ten because they don't have the same easy travel schedule that Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, even Nebraska, who's outside the traditional Big Ten geography, because they're all closer to each other. The original 14 Big Ten teams from much of the 2010s are all closer to each other than any of the West Coast schools are closer to Nebraska, for example. So it's helpful that USC only has to go on the road at Purdue, who's an easier team. That's Indiana. That's the state they're traveling to. Illinois, easier than, I would say, the road trip to Michigan last year. And in terms of just purely travel, certainly easier than traveling to Maryland. At Notre Dame, yet again in Indiana. And then you got at Nebraska. That's the closest of the original 14 teams that you can get that isn't, Oregon, Washington, UCLA. And then another one of the road trips, their 5th of the year, is to Oregon, who's in the same time zone. Still a lot of miles, but similar time zone at least, and you get your closest trip at the end of the year. Your second closest as your first game in November, and your second to last road trip. So I love how that aligns the travel schedule with this team, which isn't as deep as Lynn and Riley and Trumaine Carroll want this team to be, and Chad Bowen isn't as deep as they want to be, but they're deep enough to where I think they can withstand this schedule. Getting Michigan at home off a bye is huge. And then getting Nebraska on the road, yes, you'd rather have them at home, but you had them at home last year. Getting them off of a bye when Nebraska doesn't get you, if you're USC, off a bye, is also big. They have no guaranteed losses on the schedule, and any offensive line they play, Purdue, Michigan State, Illinois, Michigan, Nebraska, Northwestern, Iowa, UCLA, I would favor USC's defensive line against any of those offensive lines, or at least give it a push against any of those right now. The only 2 offensive lines where I would give USC's D-line the underdog status would be Notre Dame's O-line, which is top 5 nationally, and Oregon's, which is probably top 10, if not top 5, if you only look at the starters nationally. And if USC's D-line plays to its ceiling, and you factor in scheme, and that Lynn, I think, is a top 10, if not top 5 defensive coordinator nationally, some of that scheme advantage could play in, and you could see USC's defensive line win the majority or all of its battles in the trenches this year because of the linebacker they have behind them, the linebackers, the safeties, and the commander on defense in D'Anton Lynn that they have. I'm high on this unit. I'm particularly high on USC's defense. USC's defense is a bigger reason why I'm picking this team to succeed more so than its offense, actually. All right. All righty. Only 2 more to go. I don't know why the viewership dropped off so much, but that's okay. Stuff happens. Things rebound. That's all good. Yeah. 20 likes. Thank you so much. Isaac says, love your stuff, man. Go Bucks. Go Buckeyes to you too. Make sure everyone who's on right now to share this video around, like the show, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I'd appreciate that very much. And thank you for the views. Thank you for the support. All these clips, all these segments will be out tonight or tomorrow. One of the two at the latest. Let's talk about the Miami defensive backs, because this unit is going to make or break the Hurricane season. It's going to effectively determine whether or not the Miami Hurricanes reach the college football playoff or not. That's what it's going to determine. Will the Miami secondary bounce back after a tremendously down 2024 season, where I can make the argument that Miami's secondary definitely cost them a game? If not, they almost cost them 2-3 games. We all remember that Virginia Tech game where one could make the argument that Virginia Tech won on that Hail Mary. We all remember Syracuse, where Syracuse just through the air absolutely torched Miami's defense. This secondary has to improve, and it needs to rebound quickly. Miami's defensive backs must rebound quickly if the Hurricanes want to reach the college football playoff in 2025. They have Notre Dame knocking on their door week 1. A few weeks later, Florida comes to town. They also have to play Louisville, and they have to play SMU. So they avoid Clemson, but they will have to play several good to potentially elite quarterbacks and competent wide receiver groups and coaches. Last year's secondary was straight up a liability. It was. And they made moves in the portal. They made a move at defensive coordinator, hiring Corey Heatherman, firing Lance Goodry. And I love a lot of the players they brought in. So Jacoby Thomas from Tennessee, Zechariah Poyser from Jacksonville State, Xavier Lucas from Wisconsin, Keontae Scott from Auburn. I love a lot of those players. And then you also got to remember Charles Brantley. They brought him in from Michigan State. It's him and Keontae Scott battling for that nickel position, that fifth defensive back. And O.J. Frederick returns, O.J. Frederick Jr., who is a true freshman corner last year who played rather well. So on paper, this defensive line, this defensive back group improves dramatically. I will also say on paper, Miami's defensive line, a little bit of a brain fart there, they should be pretty good too. A lot of positive reports about David Blay. They move Ruben Bain Jr. around a lot. He's an All-American. And they have players like Armando Blount and Scott on the interior. There's a lot to love about Miami's defense, period. And then linebackers, another video as well. But I want to focus on defensive back in talking about the Hurricanes because that is going to be the make or break position of the entire team. Receiver is limited upside, but I also think they have a high floor. Tight end is deep. The offensive line is deep. Limitless ceiling, pretty high floor. Running back, same thing. Quarterback, as long as Beck is healthy, medium floor, pretty high ceiling. Play calling on offense, good, and it's Shannon Dawson's third year in the system, so things should be settled. The defensive line and linebacker group were not the issue for Miami's defense last year. It was scheme, and it was secondary talent. Scheme, I believe, has been fixed, because Corey Heatherman comes in and he is an upgrade over Guidry, in my opinion. The question is, does the talent pan out here? Looking at Frederic Jr., who had a pick, 7 passes defended, 620 snaps, PFF grade of a 76.2. Only returning starter last season that will play significantly in the secondary. Thomas, Poyser, Lucas, and Scott all are coming in with 200 snaps or more. Poyser at over 800 snaps at Jacksonville State, but is a G5 school. Had a good PFF grade in the 70s. Same with Xavier Lucas, who played as a true freshman. Jacoby Thomas had a PFF grade in the high 60s. Keontae Scott was pretty inconsistent last year. I think he got dinged up. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But he had a pretty great 2023 campaign at Auburn. And Charles Brantley was a high-level player at Michigan State. Very high-level player. Physical, improved dramatically going from Scotty Hazelton to Joe Rossi as an example of a defensive coordinator change. So I'm high on this secondary overall, and I will say that I think it will rebound. I think it will be not just a okay secondary, a good secondary. I think it will be a great secondary. It could, not saying it will, it could be the best secondary in the ACC. There is a world where it is a better secondary than what Clemson fields. There is a world where that's the case. Not predicting it here or now, just putting the hypothetical out there. Against Notre Dame in week 1, they will have to play some good receivers in Jaden Greathouse and Malachi Fields. And CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie, one of them, whoever starts, will at least be okay. However, will they be facing Jeremiah Smith? Will they be facing Clemson's receivers, or Auburn's, or Alabama's, or even a receiver of Ryan Wingo's caliber, or USC's receivers? No. Notre Dame has good receivers, but they are not impossible to guard. So that is a doable test that Miami can pass. If they don't, I would be very concerned. If they do pass that test, I'm kind of still in the wait-and-see mode. Against Bethune-Cookman and USF, the secondary should have no problems there. Against Florida, I think that will be a greater test. Same with Notre Dame. The secondary will be better tested there in terms of tackling and fundamental football, not necessarily in terms of how high is your ceiling. Florida's pretty banged up at wide receiver, and I believe that Lagway, so quarterback, and their offensive line, Jake Slaughter and the boys up front there, that will be a bigger challenge than Florida's wide receivers. Florida State, you have Deuce Robinson, you don't have much else. Louisville would probably be the biggest challenge they'll face through the air, just with Jeff Brom's schematics and with Miller Moss as his quarterback. They have Dakari Collins at wide receiver, Colin Lacey, for example. I like what Louisville has at receiver, and Brom, especially where Louisville is coming off the bye, is going to utilize that time to prepare rather well. And then Stanford, SMU, Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pittsburgh. There might be some concerns there, but not if your secondary is great. And I believe the secondary is going to be great. So I will tell you that means Miami's playoff chances, from my perspective, are favorable. I think that plus 198 for playoff odds is a bit too low. There's value there. ECC odds, they'll have to probably face Clemson, so that is something that's up to you. I think Clemson will be a better team this year. But this is a playoff contender, and if the secondary is great and everything else on the team regresses or improves at a natural expected rate, looking at the returning production of each position, then this could be a national championship caliber team, especially if Beck plays well and Heatherman and these defensive players and the personnel click pretty quickly in year 1. Finally, let's move on to Clemson's defensive line. Clemson has the best defensive line in college football in terms of raw NFL talent. You got DeMonte Capehart, Peter Woods at defensive tackle. Vic Burley, the third guy, was a top 100 player, I believe 5-star out of high school. And then you have TJ Parker at defensive end, and you got incoming transfer, one of Dabo Swinney's first transfer additions in Will Helt, who had 5 sacks last year. So if they are the best in an NFL perspective, where they will probably have 2 first-round draft picks on the defensive line. There could be a world where they have 3, all taken in one draft, the 2026 draft. Will that success translate to on-field success? Will it? Because that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the better NFL player is not the better college football player. Sometimes. Because the NFL, in terms of physicality, athleticism, size, stamina, what is expected of you, is totally different. It is a whole nother level than college. Derrick Henry, Mac Jones, Josh Jacobs, Devonta Smith, Jalen Hurts, naming a bunch of Alabama players, but like Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Justin Ross, all of these players, Sammy Watkins, they can all tell you that. They can all tell you that it's different. So the great college player is not always the great NFL player. And the inverse is true too. And that was the case last year. This group could not stop the run to save their life. Great in pass rush. Not fantastic, not number 1, but pretty good. Awesome. Like not Ole Miss caliber, not Ohio State at the end of the year caliber, not Michigan caliber, but fantastic. But in run blocking, or run defense, run blocking on the defensive side, it was bad. It was an unmitigated disaster what Wes Goodwin did on the defensive side of the ball in 2024. Peter Woods had an 83.7 PFF grade with 3 sacks and 395 snaps. And yet, despite having a player of that caliber, and DeMonte Capehart and Vic Burley, all of these players on the inside, and Stephalon Green too, who went to the NFL, they could not stop the run. And then you had TJ Parker, 88.1 PFF grade with 11 sacks on 640 snaps. Will Helt comes in from Purdue, another defense that struggled last year, though much worse than Clemson's. 5 sacks, 726 snaps, 72.3 PFF grade. They had phenomenal defensive ends, and they also could not stop the run. They had great linebackers too, like Barrett Carter, for example, last year. Very talented linebacker. And he went off to the NFL, and he is having success right now. And a lot of it was scheme, but part of me also wonders how much of it was the talent. Because sometimes things don't translate from, NFL talent to on-field college success. Some of that's due to scheme, some of it's the coordinator's fault, some of it's the player's fault. I'm very curious, much like the Alabama offensive line, which was very inconsistent last year and has been every year since 2020, despite all the talent they have NFL-wise on it. Curious to see if the Clemson defensive line is the exact same way this year. They were that way last year. To a lesser degree, they were that way in 2023, and similar with 2022. Feels like ever since Venables left, the defense has not been the same. There was a noticeable drop-off from 21 to 22. From 22 to 23, there wasn't really a drop-off, but it still wasn't quite a Venables defense. And then last year, the door swung open. Everyone saw the ugly mess, the stank, the grossness, the sludge in the house. Everyone saw that. It was gross. The clutter, the hoarding, and you have to clear it all out. And they brought in Tom Allen. How quickly can Tom Allen fix this defense? And if he does fix it, does the talent gel completely together and you go from a bad rushing defense and just a good pass rush to an elite pass rush and a near elite, potentially elite run defense? We'll have to see. I like the talent this unit has. I think Peter Woods is the best defensive tackle in America, and TJ Parker's a top 5 defensive end, and I love the depth they have. So there's a chance of that. Clemson's plus 110 in ACC odds for a reason. A lot of it's the talent they bring back on both sides of the ball, especially the defensive line. I look at week 1 against LSU. Clemson's defensive line in run defense, and especially in pass rush and pass defense, should eat that LSU offensive line alive for breakfast. They should eat them. That should be If you are a Clemson fan, you should expect that to be a double-digit win. Not going to say a splattering because LSU is pretty good, but you should expect a win there, in large part because of your defensive line, and also your offensive line is experienced in a way that LSU's just isn't. Troy should be a pretty easy win. Georgia Tech on the road week 3 will be tough, and Georgia Tech's offensive line is really good, probably better than LSU's, but on talent alone, you should expect to win that trench battle. Syracuse, same thing. North Carolina week 6, same thing. Boston College week 7, same thing. Duke week 8, same. Or SMU week 8, even though they have some good players in the line. Same thing with Duke week 10. They have some good players in the O-line. Love Matt Craycraft, but you should still win and own in the trenches. Florida State, similar. Louisville, similar. Furman, similar. And then South Carolina. I mean, if fundamentals, and Tom Allen stressed this, like when he got to Clemson, it was clear that he thought the fundamentals were bad based on what he has said to the public and to reporters. Like, we got to get back to fundamentals and tackling, and we got to have a new energy here. If Clemson had that last year, they beat South Carolina, maybe would have beaten Louisville, and they probably play Texas closer, maybe even outright upset them on the road. So if you're a Clemson fan with the emphasis on defensive fundamentals and all you return on the team, especially on the defensive line, and the fact that the D-line was probably the area most held back by the scheme last season on defense, you should be excited and you should be pumped up for what Clemson has to offer this year. The win total got moved from 9.5 to 10.5, and although typically when win totals move that way and the public is always on one side and sharps are always on one side, just intuitively, you kind of want to watch out for that. But I love Clemson. I mean, Clemson, they could lose a game for sure. The odds say they're going to lose a regular season game. Will they lose 2? I don't know. I probably wouldn't pick them to, and I certainly wouldn't pick them to lose 3. So be excited about this team, and the defensive line's a huge reason why you should be. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure to see you all on here. Really appreciate it. I really, really appreciate it. Make sure to like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. I will see you all tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Same thing, Wednesday and Thursday. Maybe if we get some more Super Chats Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, there can be an additional live show if you guys want Friday or Saturday. In which case, a lot of that will be Q&A because I plan to get most of my stuff, most of my content prepped and recorded out of the way by Friday. We'll see. See you guys tomorrow. And also in terms of YouTube posts and in terms of videos and my activity on Twitter, I'll see you guys probably tonight, if not tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.